Hey Virgo, how's it going? I got some oracle messages for you here today. This one was fun. It's a caterpillar I saw in my meditation, munching on a leaf. And then he sprouted butterfly wings and flew off, and flew and silhouetted himself against the sun, all glorious like. And it was interesting because normally we think of caterpillars as going into a cocoon and then transforming into a butterfly. But here we just had a caterpillar that kept its caterpillar form and simply sprouted wings. I immediately thought of a quote that's attributed to Rumi, a 13th century Arab poet. 13th century? I can't remember exactly, maybe 14th century Arab poet. This quote is also inscribed over the tomb of St. Paul in Mount Athos, Greece, which is like a very holy mountain. And lots of hippies from the West went there in the 60s and 70s. And the quote is as follows: "If you die before you die, you don't die when you die." This is the idea of having a spiritual transformation during your life, and in doing so, gaining that spiritual immortality, so that when the body dies, the spirit doesn't. That's kind of what I got with this caterpillar. It was very like symbolic of, the caterpillar normally has to die. It has to turn into goop inside of the cocoon before it can transform into a butterfly. But here, this particular caterpillar had its cake and ate it too. It stayed a caterpillar, but also grew its butterfly wings. That to me is keeping intact the self, or the individuality, the individual, during the transformation. When we develop our spiritual practices and we start taking it seriously, we have to basically develop spiritual organs the same way we have eyes and ears and so on our physical forms. We kind of have to develop astral eyes and ears, and mental eyes and ears, and spiritual eyes and ears, and things like that. Because generally, depending on your disposition and your natal chart and your karma and all sorts of other stuff, generally we're not born with these organs, these sort of spiritual organs. They have to be developed through deliberate choice and practice, at least in my experience. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it seems like to me. And when we do this, we become more of an individual, and we can hold on to our sort of selfhood as we pass into what the Tibetan Buddhists would call the bardo, or that space between life and death, or between life and another life. If we don't develop those organs, we really die. And we kind of, according to Buddhist tradition, we will lose our individuality and sort of be recycled and then reincarnated as a different individual. But if we develop, kind of like a butterfly, right? It's not a caterpillar anymore, it's something else. But if we develop those spiritual organs and maintain our individuality and keep our heads, when we die and we see what's happening at the moment of death, we can keep ourselves together, or so they say. That's what the great sages say. And it's a rare thing for people to achieve that. It takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of self-honesty. And I got I Ching Hexagram number 24, turning back, with the 5th changing line there, changes to hexagram 3, beginning. Now, turning back is like returning, going back to the origin. And especially when we have this 5th changing line here, it's really an idea of going to the origin, of being totally sincere and honest about returning, about going within and being completely honest with ourselves, bringing light to the subconscious so that we can illuminate the subconscious, illuminate our shortcomings, and be totally honest about what our shortcomings are so that we can rectify them. The phrase, the acronym vitriol comes to mind. It's a medieval alchemical Latin acronym, visita interiora terrae rectificando inveni secundum lapidum. It means visit the interior of the earth, and rectifying what you find there, you will discover the hidden stone. Sometimes it's opere lapidum, the stone for the work, or occulti lapidum, the hidden stone. Anyway, what it means, well, one interpretation of what it means is that you search within yourself, deep, deep, deep within yourself. You find what makes you tick, and you rectify it. And then you discover the so-called hidden stone, or the stone for the work, what we call the philosopher's stone, which is essentially, on a very specific level, it's kind of where the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body work together and are overseen by the spiritual body. It's like unifying our lower nature and working with it, because the higher nature probably already perfect, right? In the transcendent sense, there's no perfecting something in that realm. But on the lower, the astral, etheric, and physical realms, that's where we do our work. And that's where we seek these ideas of immortality or enlightenment or transcendence, or the integration of the individual and all that sort of stuff, whether you're coming at it from the yoga perspective or the Jungian perspective or the Christian perspective, the Eastern or the Western or the shamanic perspective, or whatever it is. It's all relatively the same idea is of self-improvement. And in order for us to do that, to improve ourselves, we need to understand, we need to connect ourselves to the origin of reality, right? We need to find that origin, return to it, and find how it is within us, find how it applies to our lives, find how we can use it to affect our lives and draw strength and knowledge and wisdom from it, how we can act from it, how we can rest in it, just returning to that origin point. And in doing this, it's very important to be honest with yourself. It's one thing about spiritual work is that a lot of people don't want to do it. And not even just spiritual work per se, but just self-awareness training, because you have to be honest with yourself. You have to judge yourself, and you have to be very relentless when you judge yourself. I know a lot of people don't like that idea. They say, be kind and gentle with yourself and don't judge yourself. I tend to disagree. You can be kind and gentle with others, but when taking spiritual practice seriously and really trying to improve yourself as a human being, to become fully human, there's no room for gentleness on yourself, to the extent that you're not causing yourself any emotional or mental distress, of course. If you're causing yourself emotional and mental distress because you're berating yourself in an unbalanced way, that's not healthy. But strict judgment against yourself as yourself is super important. I don't know why people think you need to be gentle with yourself. We're all strong enough to where you don't have to be, as long as you're honest. Now, I know that there are many people in the world who won't do that. Like I'm saying, this sort of self-awareness training is very difficult for the vast majority of humanity, because you're holding up a mirror to yourself and you're going to see all the horrible things that are within ourselves. Our tendencies to evil, our possibilities to do evil, our selfishness, our mistakes we've made, our arrogance, and our, how the 7 deadly sins operate within us. We see all these things about ourselves, and it can be very, very difficult. So that's why it's important to be stern with ourselves so we don't run from the work. If we shy away from these things we see when we look within, and we're gentle with ourselves about it, then we'll give up on the work. Again, when I say judge yourself, I mean in a balanced, real, rational, actual way. Don't just berate yourself because you think you're a bad person. That's unhealthy and unhinged. I just mean be honest with yourself. We all know the difference between good and evil. It's not, a child knows these things. And just to be honest with yourself about those things within yourself, it's really not that difficult of a thing to do if you're honest about doing real self-awareness training. And that's the most important thing here. And that's how transformation occurs in the most rapid way, at least in my experience. There's no better spiritual practice than simple self-awareness training. looking within, finding all the good things about yourself, all the bad things about yourself, and maybe writing them down in a journal, and then putting like a score to them, like 1 to 4. 1 being not very good or not very bad, 2 being pretty good, pretty bad, 3 being like, okay, that's very good, or 3, this is a pretty significant problem, and 4 being like, yeah, this is a really good virtue in myself, or on the bad side, this is like a significant problem. And finding out all those things. Take a few weeks to keep a journal about it. You'll probably find several hundred things, virtues and negative things, and you can weigh these things. You can apply an element to each thing. So like being overly melancholy would be like a watery thing, or being too elated and happy would probably be like maybe a bit of a watery thing, or an airy or fiery thing. And like find out which elements are dominant within you and which ones are weak within you. And this is a good way of balancing ourselves. And when doing this type of work, and we're being super self-honest, it's very transformative. This is one of the best ways to die before you die, kind of a thing. This is one of the quickest ways of transforming your inner life, at least in my experience. Again, I can only speak from my own experience. And it's one of the best keys to that inner transformation is just self-remembrance, self-awareness training. And all of the other spiritual disciplines that people like to practice today are great and do what you feel drawn to do. But I find this path is the simplest and the most straightforward and has the most rapid results. Self-observation. The other practices are more like supplements to this, to be able to do this without having too much emotional problems or psychological problems while being honest with yourself. You know, you can practice the breathing exercises and the stretching and the exercising and the positive thinking and that sort of stuff, basically to smooth over the fact that you're being brutally honest with yourself and not get too stressed about it. And it can take anywhere from a few days, a few weeks, a few months to several years to really break all this down about yourself and to keep the observations. And you'll find that you don't really have to do anything to transform these things that you don't like about yourself or to enhance the things that you do like. You'll find it comes naturally as you become aware of them. You'll intuitively know how to act and what to do in order to mitigate the bad things and improve the good things. And you don't really have to stress out about like, well, what do I do after I collect these observations? You'll know. You'll know in your heart and in your mind on your own. You'll develop it on your own, how to deal with this stuff, and it will come very naturally to you. Self-observation is a very powerful technique. That's why I recommend it so much, because it improves your intuition and it unlocks a tailor-made spiritual path that's just for you. It creates within your intuition like a really good compass needle that shows you, oh, you know what, I feel drawn to this practice, I'm gonna do this. And then you realize doing this particular little practice like helped you get rid of one of the level 3 bad things you didn't like, stuff like that. It just comes naturally with time. And I think you're on that path. I think you're achieving that. You've probably been on that path, and yeah, you're gonna have, like, following your intuition in this way, you're gonna have that that transformation and that integration of your individuality without having to like give up too much about your personality. I just remembered a joke from some TV show or a movie, I can't remember. Some people were talking about like this dude who took on yoga and spiritual practice, and they're like, yeah, he healed himself very well, very thoroughly. He healed himself right out of a personality. I thought it was very funny. We see people like that all the time who just practice like the yoga and the spiritual disciplines to the point where they're just like a freaking blank slate, like they just kind of go through life like a zombie after that point. And they've obliterated their personality essentially. I don't think that's going to happen to you. If that's a worry you've had, I don't think that's going to happen. You're going to be able to keep your personality, and you're just going to become more yourself, whoever that is. You'll just become more you. And you don't have to, like, it's a misconception of a lot of spiritual practice in the modern world is that you have to obliterate your personality in order to achieve enlightenment. You have to give up your personality. This is what we can call a Luciferian characterization of mysticism. And mysticism, or Luciferian mysticism, is like complete world denial, complete self-denial. Like the world and matter is an evil thing, and this is an evil place, and you have to just eliminate it, eliminate your small self, eliminate everything about yourself, and just, dissolve into the unity of God or whatever. And that, some people enjoy that. That's a path for some people that they feel very called to and drawn to. In my opinion, I think that is probably a hangover from the Vedic period of thousands of years ago and doesn't really serve the modern world. It can serve yourself, sure. You can go away into a mountain and do that if you want, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't have it really doesn't have any benefit except for anyone but yourself. And that's fine if that's what you're into. You do you. I'm not judging that, but most of us have to live in this world, earn money, participate in society, and all that sort of stuff. And if we follow that Luciferian path, most of us are not going to go live in a mountain cave where it's okay to do that stuff, or a monastery where it's okay to follow the Luciferian path. We are going to remain in a house. We have to pay property taxes or rent. We have to buy groceries. We have to do these things. If you follow the Luciferian path, that is going to fall apart. And you're going to become like homeless or something. And that's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help yourself unless you just genuinely don't care. Again, you do you. But a balanced approach is going to be discovered by you, or maybe you've already discovered it and you're wondering, is this balanced approach correct? This kind of goes against my previous ideas. I like the idea of world denial and self-denial. It works. It has good results. It has fast results, which is true. The Luciferian path has very, very thorough results, effective results. But you might be getting drawn to a more balanced path that kind of illuminates the world as well, the realm of matter and human life as well, that it includes that within its path. And sometimes we can think, oh, that's anti-spiritual. It sounds too materialistic, like it sounds too telluric or chthonic. I don't care for those types of ideas. And you might be struggling, like, do I bother exploring this path that seems tainted with materialism? I would say, give it a shot. You might find it actually is very good for you, and you might not need to follow the path perfectly or according to the textbook or according to the letter, but you could find that whatever it is you're studying or practicing will inspire you to just see the world in a different way and allow you to just integrate some of those ideas into whatever intuitive, syncretic, or custom practices you develop on your own. And spirit and matter. You can have your cake and eat it too, without having to give up too much of either, or give up any of either. So I'm going to pull some cards for you, Taurus, and we'll develop this reading further. Virgo. Sorry, I just called you Taurus, didn't I? Virgo. What does Virgo need to know? So we have the Sorcerer. It's a little lightning bolt symbol. This is kind of like the dark-sided magician. Imagine the tarot card of the magician, and imagine like the negative aspects of a magician. Now, I just got a vibe that that might actually be a good thing to explore. Not like practicing sorcery to exploit people. That's not what I mean. Generally a sorcerer is someone who uses magic to exploit other people. But there's another side of a sorcerer that's not negative. It's the magician who's more concerned with material things. Like a technologist, for example, is an aspect of the sorcerer. A technologist is a sorcerer. Not necessarily a bad one. It's just someone who can envision, manipulating, how to manipulate the material world, how to create tools that allow an increase of understanding and human power within the material realm and not necessarily within the spiritual realm at all. And you might be interested in just grounding yourself with something like that, some studies in technology, studies in tools, studies in dealing with the physical world as it is, dealing with the physical world as such, getting into some left brain stuff to ground your right brain stuff. That you might find it very interesting and inspiring at this time. Another interpretation is don't get lost in technology at this time. Make sure you're not using occult practices for things that harm others. That's never a good idea. But let's see, the Sorcerer. We have the Two of Swords here. In this deck, it says peace down here at the bottom. Some of these cards say some pretty interesting things. Not all of them have special words, but some of them do. And yeah, this is a card. I mean, have you ever picked up swords that are that long? They're very heavy. And they're pretty difficult to hold like that. So this is a very well-balanced person sitting here. It's also pretty dangerous to do such a thing blindfolded. So this person has a lot of self-control and a great deal of balance. And this is lunar and aerial in its vibe. And that's like, it's having a lot of control over your imagination, using your imagination for spiritual practice. A lot of people are reluctant to use their imaginations in the modern world, at least since like the 19th century, with modern industrialism, modern science, modern technology, Darwinism, evolutionism. These ideas have led us to believe that our imagination is like unreal. You know, we have phrases like, oh, that's just your imagination and stuff like that. And our imaginations can be unreal. They can get the better of us or they can just be delusional. But that's not to say they are always unreal. The imagination is the foundation of human culture. It's also the source of technology, as I was saying. And when we have a balanced imagination and we can use it to great effect, like, you know, imagine someone like Nikola Tesla. He was a great technologist and he didn't do a lot of trial and error development the way many engineers do. Engineers will have an idea and their imaginations are not that well developed. And so they don't really envision the thing they want to create thoroughly. They envision it to an extent, maybe get 10 to 15% there in their imaginations, and then they have to do a long series of trial and error before they get a thing, a tool, a machine that actually works. Thomas Edison was famous for doing trial and error. He tried, like, when he had an idea, it would take him hundreds and hundreds of iterations to get a single thing working. And then his contemporary and competitor, Nikola Tesla, usually only had to do something once, maybe 2 or 3 times before he got it right, because he could envision something in his imagination very thoroughly and very accurately. And he had a very well-balanced right and left brain hemisphere, a very well-balanced, spiritual or soulful side and materialistic, logical side. And he was able to combine them to the point where he could accurately imagine material phenomena and create machinery and tools very, very accurately and rapidly, because his imagination was so well tuned to material phenomena. And that's the vibe I get here. I get 2 brain hemispheres that are just working well together. The blindfold makes me think of the imagination. Her eyes are closed, the moon is up. You can say that might be a waning crescent, kind of like what we call a Shivaratri moon, the last day before the new moon. The last sliver of light of the intellect before the intellect shuts off, and then more soulful astral forces take over, as represented by perhaps the moon sphere or some other higher sphere. And the imagination can be, like, the intellect can be fully within the imagination, right? Kind of overshadowed by the imagination, but it's not overshadowed. The moon, when it's new, it only looks like it's gone to us from our perspective here as humans on the surface of the Earth. But on the other side of the moon, it's completely illuminated, it's completely in sunlight. So the mind being sort of hidden or subsumed by the imagination, but still fully illuminated within this secret world, your inner world, your imaginative world. It's only for you, nobody else can see it. It's like secret. And you can draw from that. You can, at this time, you'll be able to really create something practical. Your ideas will be able to form in the physical world very easily at this time. You can maybe develop tools or create artwork that's like exactly what you imagined it would be. It's going to come out now. I'm going to pull another card for you. Cultural ideas, things to enhance human culture will work very well. A new fashion trend you might start. Some new imaginative idea. Because, you know, all human culture comes from the imagination first. The moon sphere is also very confusing. Here we have the card of confusion. So, not getting lost can be a challenge when we are trying to develop our imagination and use our imagination. And when we want to create with minimal trial and error, it can be very difficult to figure out how exactly to do that. When people ask Nikola Tesla how he did it, he basically just shrugged his shoulders. And it's really difficult to find teachings on this as well, how to develop an imagination that is materially accurate. There's just not that much out there. It's also one of the more well-guarded secrets of occult societies who do know how to do these things. They don't like to talk about it because it can be dangerous in the wrong hands. You know, teaching people how to very quickly and very accurately create from their imaginations is like allowing people to download schematics to like a nuclear bomb. You know, like you can't divulge that information to the public. It's not safe. Teaching people how to quickly create from their imagination is not safe. A lot of us have really messed up imaginations and desires. So you might be experiencing confusion on how can I practice this? What sort of practices do I have to do? Where can I find books on this? Again, it's going to go back to self-awareness training. This is coming out on the sorcerer aspect, and sorcerers don't like self-awareness. The negative side of sorcerers, they even the positive side to an extent, they're very externally oriented. They like using occult powers or technological or scientific powers in an external fashion to dominate external phenomena, which can be either beneficial or harmful. It's neither here nor there. I'm just pointing out that sorcerer energy is directed outwardly. And self-awareness training doesn't really occur to them. They don't think they have to do it. You know, they kind of take their minds for granted. They think their perceptions are 100% accurate, they know what reality is, and they don't have to learn what their mind is or how their consciousness works or do shadow work or anything like that. It's just generally not something it's not something that occurs to them to do. They're not interested in it, they've probably never heard of it. So when someone is in their sorcerer energy and they realize, wait, actually I do have to figure out how my imagination works, it can be like a real shock to a sorcerer personality type of like, wait a second, I've never thought about this before. I have to develop my imagination so that I can work more effectively in the external world. And then they try to find sources of knowledge on how to do that. There's not much there. But you can discover it on your own because your imagination is yours. It's within yourself. You know, you can find out how it works by yourself. You don't need anyone to tell you how it works. You can just collect observations about it. So like the self-observation journaling I was talking about earlier, you can do it with your mind and your imagination. Every time you have a thought, every time you have a daydream, every time you have a dream during sleep, when you space out, where your imagination goes, Try and catch yourself. Recognize that your mind is wandering or you're daydreaming or you're thinking about something, and write down what it was that you were daydreaming about or imagining or thinking about. The more you do this, the more aware you will become of how your imagination works. You'll feel its texture, you'll feel the origins of these daydreams, you'll start to understand how they arise within your imagination, and then you'll learn how to manipulate them. You'll learn how to catch them before they originate, and then you can choose how they originate. And doing that in conjunction with whatever your external studies are, whether it's science and technology or something else, artistic, whatever, it will, like that external study will sort of plant seeds within your imagination, because you're learning this external thing while being self-aware and learning about your imagination and how it works. And the two things will kind of merge and mingle together because you're doing them at the same time. And that is pretty much the key of developing your imagination that is materially accurate, because you're studying a material practice or science or art or something, or craft or something, while doing this, and the intermingling of these two things will be very fertile for you at this time. So there's no real textbook way of doing this sort of stuff. I suppose you could try and join a real occult society, but such initiatic orders don't really exist in the modern world, unfortunately. They're kind of just not there. There are people who like to LARP and pretend like they belong to occult societies that do real work, but it's minimally effective, unfortunately. I know I sound like I'm talking shit here, but I've got a lot of experience with those groups. And they're good people. They're trying. I just don't find it to be particularly helpful. That's just me. You're on your own. You're not really on your own. You can, of course, talk about this with anybody who's interested, and you can help each other. But you'll all kind of be on the same page. Like, finding a master or a guru on this stuff is next to impossible in the modern world. But you can all share the journey together and communicate and help each other out. That's really the point of these occult groups, is to share in the journey. If you join an occult group where there's some guy who claims to be a master at this stuff, I don't know. I wouldn't trust him too much. Alright, what does Virgo need to know? Last thing. We have the planetary symbol for Saturn and the number 9. So, Saturnian energy, as dark and scary and malefic as it may be, is also a very helpful energy. Now, the Sorcerer and Saturn go together very well. The Sorcerer is like, in some respects, a human avatar of Saturn. Not all the time. Mercury can also be very sorcerous, but Saturn is often focused very much on the passage of time and on material phenomena and the birth and death of things, like, things in the physical world. Saturn sets those borders, the beginnings and the ends of things. There's the Goya painting of Saturn eating his own children. That's time devouring its own creations. Understanding the passage of time and how it affects material phenomena is also a great meditation. You can imagine a plant growing, thriving, and dying in a process. In meditation, that can be a good way of focusing your thoughts as well. If you have like a wandering mind and you find it difficult to meditate, thinking about life cycles of things is a very good meditation at this time. And that'll really help you to envision things. You can start with real things, a real flower that you know of, and then you can then graduate to invented flowers that you create in your mind and the life cycles of those. And when you get to the point where you can do that, where you don't need to base your meditation on an actual thing, when you can create a thing in your mind, in your mind's eye, in your imagination, that is a pretty advanced, that's a good place to be. You've made progress when you can imagine the life cycle of an imaginary plant. So developing that is probably a good idea at this time. And Saturn also is like the spirit of people who desire salvation and cessation from suffering. The planetary spirit of Saturn has a great deal of compassion for people who want their suffering to end, who want certain episodes in their lives to come to a close. Saturn can help with that. And so he's not all that bad. He can cut away the things in our lives that no longer serve us. He can cut away bad emotions that we no longer want to have, that we no longer want to feel. He can help us work on that self-work. Saturn likes to get into the shadow, and he likes to meet us there in the shadow. And he rewards those who are brave enough to work with him, because he's a scary guy. And his ministers, the other spirits of Saturn, they're like very, very stern bureaucrats in a way. Like, they're kind of frightening and serious, but very, very helpful when you approach them in the right way, in an orderly way. You know, like, we all hate bureaucrats because they're just constantly throwing obstructions in our path and annoying us. And what do you mean I can't use 3-gauge wire? You're gonna make me use, 2-gauge. I wanted to use 3-gauge stranded. You're making me use 2-gauge wire in my house. It's not gonna have good connections. Well, that's what it says on my checklist here. You have to use this gauge copper wire. It's like, well, I know better. I'm an electrical engineer. Piss off. And they annoy us, right? But the Saturnian bureaucrats, if you approach them and your boxes are all checked, you've dotted every T and crossed every I, and everything's in order and everything looks good, and you know how to get through the bureaucracy, they're going to have a lot of respect for you. They're going to be like, this person is orderly, this person is prepared, this person is ready to get down to business, and they will cut through the red tape, smooth it out, and help you do the shadow work very efficiently. And again, they're very ruthless and judgmental, so be prepared for that. But it's only because it's helpful and necessary. So engaging with that at this time might be a good idea. But if you do engage with Saturnian spirits, make sure you also engage with some sunlight and the solar sphere as well. Maybe before you do the Saturnian stuff, and then after you do the Saturnian stuff, kind of bookend your Saturnian work with solar work. And that helps just smooth out the sort of cold intensity of Saturnian energy. But treat Saturn with respect, and he will treat you with respect at this time and be very, very helpful. So Virgo, I think that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I always appreciate it when you stop by. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time.